All right, welcome to Gateway API meeting, the last one in March this year. We've got lots on the agenda today, but if you're new to Gateway API meetings, welcome. I'm Rob. Nick also leads out a lot in these meetings. And as we say all the time, there is never a stupid question. We're going through some technical stuff or just stuff that assumes a lot of built-in knowledge. A lot of us have been working on this project for 2 or 3 years now, it seems like. I've lost track of how many, but it's been a while. So please do ask questions or make comments at any point. But with that, let's go ahead. I think, Nick, you're first up. You had a draft on route delegation and status specifically. So I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, so thanks, Rob. And so I've just been working on this to go along with Jeff's delegation proposal. It kind of assumes knowledge of the other delegation proposals. So in short, remember that's we'll add an allowed routes status to stanza to each HTTP route rule. A HTTP route rule is considered a parent HTTP route if a single allowed routes stanza is non-nil in any of its rules. A rule may have backend refs and allowed routes. So a rule may not. A rule may only have one or the other, but a HTTP route may have multiple rules, one of which is a backend ref and one of which is an allowed routes. So that background is relatively important because what it means is that we need to be able to handle both cases. But we've also said it that if you are a parent, i.e. you have one allowed routes, at least one allowed route stanza not nil, then you can't also have a parent ref pointing to a HTTP route, i.e. be a child. Okay, so as you can see here, my proposal is pretty simple. We're going to add, I propose we add a children stanza to status. The naming, I'm okay to argue about there, but given that one of them is parents, it seemed pretty obvious to make the other one children. The actual children struct is basically the same struct as the listener status on the gateway, because it does basically the same function. It has a supported kinds struct, which I'm a bit iffy about adding, but I put in there for completeness so we can talk about it. It has an attached routes number, which tells you how many routes are successfully attached, and then it has the conditions. The reason we put the attached routes on the listener is to give you some feedback about exactly how many routes are attached, without you having to keep track of, without you having to reference every single route that's attached. The reason you don't want to do that in status is that it creates fan out problems whenever something gets updated, and you really don't want to have 2n or worse n squared number of updates to the API server every time you update one object. Yeah, so that's sort of the headline bits. I started writing down some actual rules in the document. If you want to scroll down a little bit, Rob, that just sort of puts out you got to have the controller name is the same, and that's the other one, is that I put the controller name from the listener status into this one as well. That's necessary because a route can be parented by multiple resources. It can have multiple parent refs. So it's conceivable that a parent route could itself be parented by multiple gateways that are controlled by different controllers. Okay, there's a lot of caveats and clauses in that sentence, but the key part there is that you can create, it's conceivable that you can create two trees, one with one gateway class, one with another gateway class, and end up with the same route pointing to both gateways. And in that case, you need a way to record the status that does it so that you don't overwrite the status from both controllers. So that's why controller name has to be present in this parent one. It doesn't need to be present. It's not required in the child routes because they're a leaf and they can't, and that's included in the reference to the parent ref. Because the parent ref is the parent ref already has it. Sorry, the parent ref has the controller name and the thing, the actual reference to the object. Sorry, Rob.
Sorry, I was just going to ask. I was a little confused with the YAML indentation here. Are parents and children the same level, or does
Yes.
each parent? Okay. Okay, so
So
that's why
the
you have controller
parents,
name for both
yeah,
children and okay. All right.
yeah. I didn't want to do something wacky like, namespacing both parents and children by controller name, because that would be a pretty substantial schema change that feels like it might cross the border into API rev territory. This one is pretty additive because we're just adding a new struct.
I think one possible interpretation, I'm not saying this is a good one, but just one possible thing would be that children could be nested underneath parents. So let's just say that not only could you have two gateways and each implemented by different controllers, you could have two gateways implemented by the same controller, and each of those gateways may have a different relationship with the child routes. That seems like a stretch, but it is potentially something that could happen.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point. So that in that case we would need to move the children under in that case we need to have it namespaced by both the actual resource that is the parent and the controller name, like we have the parents already.
Yeah, so I think it would just basically be to remove this and I'm not trying to leave a comment, and drop children up one. I'm not actually saying this is a good idea. These are just two different approaches that I would consider, because I think this is potentially easier to understand. I just haven't thought through myself the potential overlap. Like, is it possible that two gateways would have a different, basically grandchild status, of this? I don't know.
I guess I felt that it was unlikely that a single gateway class controller would have a reason to treat different children, to treat the child differently based on where it was included.
So,
but yeah, maybe that is true, because if there's a conflict, if there's a conflict from one parent and not from another, then yeah, you're right.
I think this is a real edge case, and I don't want to waste too much, but so just to throw a different perspective in here, for GK, we have one controller and it's implementing multiple classes. And so for example, an XLB and ILB have fundamentally different behavior and in some cases different capabilities. I can't think of any reason off the top of my head where you'd need these to be nested, but again, I'll have to think about it and come back, but that's just the first thing that stood out to me is
I think that's a pretty reasonable thing to raise. So yeah, sorry for everyone who's sort of a bit lost here. We're definitely talking at a very general API design level here, but the idea here is that that route delegation and inclusion lets you do stuff like break apart the config, break apart a large config and split it up via either for some sort of administrative reason or to split the ownership across teams. So the inclusion case is where you're breaking the config up and splitting parts up so that you just end up with a smaller resources. And the delegation case is where you're doing that, but you're doing that across ownership boundaries. So team A owns the parent resource, whether it's a gateway or a route, and then team B owns the child resource, which is always going to be a route. Now, I think in terms of the status that I have here, the reason I said that I think supported kinds may not be necessary is that I don't think we currently want to allow HTTP routes to reference, if you're doing this, to reference any parent other than a HTTP route. You don't want there to be like other types. And so I think that rule is not explicitly stated in the current design though. So we need to, if we make that specific, then we can drop that supported kinds struct.
I guess my question on that is, would it be forwards compatible, thinking about if we do want to ever do like TCP to HTTP or HTTP to gRPC or something like that, to introduce that in the future if it is omitted initially?
So in terms of the status, yeah, like adding a new field is backwards compatible because you're adding a new net nil field. That's the general sort of guideline, is that if you're adding a whole new struct, then that's 100% fine. Changing the behavior or removing an existing struct is not fine. So we could add this later if we needed to. I think the examples you used are good ones, because it is really important to remember that in general we don't want the API to be that sort of in general, we've conceived up to this point of the API as the higher layer routes. The more complicated the structure that your route is describing, the more other routes it sort of subsumes inside it. So a HTTP route implicitly includes a TCP route. A gRPC route implicitly includes both a TCP route and a HTTP route, because they're kind of a layer cake. And so I think it's so. Like I think everyone has said that why don't we have like the TCP route points to the HTTP route? And in my mind, the reason is the HTTP route already has all the details that you need. And if it doesn't, then we should bring any extra details that we need. I could see a future where you might want to add the IPLEB allow list and block list that we have in TCP route to HTTP route. That seems reasonable, rather than having like a big chain of routes. That seems extremely flexible, but dangerously so to me. So sorry, I just wanted to clarify that while I was on my head. But yeah, so okay, I think you're 100% right, Rob, that it's definitely worth considering that the children's status be namespaced by the parent. I think that's probably the way to go now that you've raised it. It's a little harder to understand, but this whole delegation and inclusion thing is, let's be clear, a very advanced use case, right? Like, we're not expecting people who want the basic functionality of the HTTP route to ever touch this or include it. That's why the allowed routes struct is defaulted to nil, and that's why this stuff, if you don't set any of this stuff, it will not work. You can't just set the parent route ref of some random HTTP route to another HTTP route and have things work. There has to be that two-way handshake, because that means both sides have to agree, and also both sides have to agree that you're activating what is, at the end of the day, pretty advanced functionality.
Cool. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I am curious for next steps on this. Are we just integrating this with the already existing gap that, okay, great. And so then we can do a final review on this in that gap PR. And okay, cool. Well, this is a huge effort. Thank you to everyone who's contributed to route delegation. Excited to get this one through. And yeah, thank you to Nick for writing this up. It looks like I didn't actually scroll down all the way. Were there any parts in here that you wanted to cover?
Yeah, so I was talking here about the conditions we wanted to add. As part of this, I spent some time reviewing the current route conditions, and they definitely are underspecified at the moment and need some work. I mean, I think Jeff, you raised the discussion a while ago about some of the implementations around listener status as well. That there's some stuff underspecified there, some edge cases where it's not clear what you're supposed to do. And so I think as we start kicking off the process to do the API review, Rob, I want to try and fix some of the things I've noticed, and sort of be a bit more specific about when you set conditions and stuff like that. And I think that we also may need to talk about adding a condition or two. In here, I've added a not supported condition, which I think we may want to sort of promote and use widely in the rest of it, just so that there's a way to flag hey, you asked, it's not attached, and it's because something is not supported, or not supported or not implemented or something like that. That was one that we needed to use in Contra as well. So anyway, so there's a larger thing there than just this status design, but I will follow up on that later on. Great.
And I would echo that not supported seems like a broadly useful condition to have here.
Yeah, cool.
I had a question on just generally leaving comments on this. So we shouldn't leave comments on this thing. It should be part of the the enhancement proposal?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, Nick, it's you wrote it up, so you can speak otherwise. But I'm pretty close to putting the actual GEP PR up. So it seems like that would be the better place if you can wait a day or two.
Yeah, cool. I'm fine with that. I just wanted to get this out so that we could talk about it today and pick up any early things like Rob's great suggestion about parents. So I think I'll probably change this bit to fold that in, put an alternative considered or something, and then Jeff, you can pick up this info. I'll give you edit on this, and you can pick up this info and just drop it straight into the GEP.
Okay, sounds good.
I'll update that today. Cool. I think the discussion of conditions rolls straight into the next agenda item. Segues for the win. Yeah, so there's Nathan, you asked a question about right now there's the conformance test kind of expect that things will be ready, but there's no way to check if it is. Did you want to say anything more about this than you had in the thread?
I think we talked about this 2 meetings ago.
Okay.
It was basically just let's not mark HTTP route as accepted until the thing's actually functional.
Right. I'm broadly supportive of there being like right now that's how it works. I think that's probably something that we should consider changing before we go to beta though. I'm quite supportive of accepted meaning syntactically valid and hangs together, and then ready meaning has been, we have at least some confidence that this has been programmed in an underlying data plane. I don't think that at this stage, I don't think that many implementations can guarantee that ready means actually ready, but ready at least, you can't, because I know for Envoy things, getting the full back propagation of the ACK back up to the Kubernetes objects is not straightforward. Yeah, but I think I'm very supportive of having a generic ready condition on everything.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Cool.
I think there's an important distinction there, and John actually raised it here and I missed it. Nick, you also just mentioned it too, that ready is maybe not the most broadly supportable term, despite me suggesting it, that ready, if you take it literally, may not be something that we can confidently say, or at least that all implementations can confidently say. Is there, you kind of mentioned like programmed, or is there some kind of generic way that we can represent, I have programmed the proxy, it will work soon, like something that we can more confidently, if we can't say ready.
Pending.
I mean, that's the exact issue that we're dealing with right now. Hey, this thing will work in a few seconds, but
I think it's fine to have your own nuanced definition of ready, but it generally, the user does want some kind of signal to their best of the system's ability.
Yeah,
like if you can guarantee it, you can say, hey, this ready means this guarantee. Otherwise, it's like, hey, the orchestration did something.
Yeah, I feel like that's that we need, if we define the condition as being, as far as the implementation is concerned, this config is good, it's been sent off to whatever data plane, if it should be ready now, if not like in an order seconds, it'll be done real soon. I don't think that should ever obviate like having random exponential back off and retries in whatever thing you are using that's looking at that status. Like if it says ready and then you go to like start probing, you still need to have like retries and REB regardless of of that, because this whole system is eventually consistent. Like there is no, even in the case that you do have the information to be pretty confident that the thing has, that the information has flowed, the fact that it takes some time for the information to flow from your data plane back to the API server and then the implementation to get the event and to do that means that it could have changed in the meantime. There's no way that you can ever be 100% confident that and have it be guaranteed. It's impossible because Kubernetes is an eventually consistent system.
It does have some implications for the conformance testing framework though. I mentioned like we were getting connection refused and then the test just fails immediately. So we might need to
I
make some
think-
adjustments there.
Yeah, I think the conformance test absolutely should have retries and REB and some
Yeah.
timeouts and stuff like that.
So what, I agree. I've been struggling with what the appropriate behavior is, because we can't just have a conformance test that says, well, at least one of these 10 requests worked, and so therefore we're good, so
Yeah.
it seems like we need retries to a certain point, and then some level of consistency after we get that first successful request,
Mhm.
maybe.
Yeah.
That does slow down our conformance test, but it does feel like maybe our only workaround here. I don't know.
That feels like about right to me. Retry until you get one success, and then retry n more times, where n
Yeah.
is some number like 2, so you end up with 3 successes or something like that.
Yeah.
3 6, and then it is, and then the metric is 3 successes before n failures or something like that.
Yeah, because
We're-
even if we do add a ready condition, or whatever we call it, we've clearly identified that is not completely reliable. It's not,
Yes.
I set
Yeah,
ready
I-
condition, you can send request to me immediately.
We're going to
Yeah.
test that you're eventually consistent within some reasonable amount of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's and then it's just a matter of defining what, how many retries and all that sort of stuff. I don't think functionally the details matter, as long as everyone is using the same set of things. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because that's what conformance is for, to ensure that everyone behaves in the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that, as Bowie says in the chat, it absolutely should be that we don't try until there is if we add a ready condition, you don't try until the ready condition is present. Then once the ready condition is present, you do, n successes before m failures, or something like that.
Cool. That makes sense. I can create an issue to track that work, but certainly if anyone wants to volunteer, I know there's a few people working around conformance. If anyone wants to volunteer to add that kind of retry, that would be awesome, because I think it does affect many of our implementations.
Well, before we go on to the next thing, while I think of it, there was one other thing I wanted to ask about conformance. I think I have mentioned it before, but I wanted to ask and get everyone's thumbs up before I make an issue and start actually working on it. I would like to add conformance testing for the webhook. The webhook will soon be required for it to be a conformant implementation. So the conformance testing for the webhook will be a separate suite. It will run the same test as we currently run in the E2Es, basically exercise the full, like all of the ways in which the webhook could not validate objects. And so the idea will be we try to apply objects that are invalid and check that the webhook successfully throws them out. That will be the conformance test for the webhook.
And so there's two different ways I'm interpreting this, and I think are you meaning that a webhook needs, so our existing conformance test will run tests that expect the webhook to catch them, and so basically part of a conformant environment is that this validation exists somewhere?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So
Yeah, because we do have the example that kind of the other thing you were describing of verifying that the webhook catches everything in invalid examples.
Yep.
I think what you're describing is one step further of running that in our existing conformance suite.
Yes, exactly. Adding that to the existing conformance suite as like another suite that is the webhook validation. That's in addition to the gateway and HTTP route validation. I think that in the future we've got a lot of work to do on the conformance testing suite. We need to have like conformance profiles and be able to tell for the implementation, be able to tell you what objects you should be testing. Like Contour will never support TCP route and UDP route, so I'd be upset if I got denied conformance because like I'm only doing HTTP route. Right now our tests only do HTTP route, so people who build implementations that only support layer TCP route and UDP route will be locked out. So we've got to handle all of those things. Cool.
Is that I'm reading that as the webhook is easily installable now. Is that valid?
It is TBD. It is on the way. So yes.
Okay.
So obviously that work is gated behind the webhook being easily installable and the YAMLs being provided, which is on me as well. So that's why I've been thinking about this. Because I'm like, once I finish this, then I got to add this to the webhook suite.
we've been waiting for the easily installable part before we go down that path.
Just
Yeah.
wipe away that sweat drop. Yeah, no
Yeah.
problem drop.
Nate's working actually on our conformance test implementation. So
Cool.
That's great. That actually is a good segue. I'll skip one ahead, and I'm thinking about an 0.4.3 release. That could include a few things. One, I was also working on a way to install our webhook, the validating webhook in GKE, and it's more difficult than it would seem, but also the version that we have in 0.4 that's released has a number of bugs in it. So I cherry picked some great fixes by, I think it's Chrismar who implemented those fixes. I have a PR that cherry picks those. I'd like to include that in 0.4 release. Maybe at the same time, like has been alluded to, we should include some YAML updates just so it's a little bit easier, because I don't want to block till 0.5.0 to have this is how you deploy the webhook. I'd like to have something just a little bit earlier. I don't think it needs to take that much effort, famous last words. But yeah, so maybe we can bundle something in there too. But I'm interested in getting an 0.4.3 out just for the webhook. Seems like others are agreeing. Any hesitation with that? Cool. Okay.
Hopefully,
yeah, I'll work with
tagging issues and stuff so that 4.3 will be tagged correctly now.
Yes. So yeah, I think this will knock out a lot of things and finally resolve that. I have another PR that actually explains how to deploy the webhook, but that how is kind of messy. So technically you can install it this way, but it's not great. So hopefully this can clean up the last bit of that. All right, so with all that background, let's take a look into V1 Beta 1. The milestone is looking reasonable to me. The thing that I see when I look through here is there are no API changes left in the milestone. Everything is either webhook or documentation related. I think there's one maybe caveat to that, and that's what we discussed earlier in the meeting of adding something like a ready condition
Yes,
to the API. So we should probably add an issue in the milestone just to track that. That's such a small, it's not even changing an API type, it's just adding a new string and some GoDoc associated with it. So I think that's going to be small. I don't think we need a GEP for that. Nick, is that something like you're wanting to volunteer for? Cool, okay.
I will create the issue and start working on a PR.
Cool. To me, this feels like something where we don't need to block at least sending it off to SIG network reviewers. Today is code freeze. They're not going to see anything today anyway. They're busy on every other thing in the world. But it feels like, hey, by the way, there's this one condition we're working on adding in status, but everything else is good. I feel like that's a reasonable thing to hand off. Is there anything else we should wait for? Okay, I can get something together. The last time I had a SIG network review, it was really just a diff between like the previous release, so 0.4 tag, and what would be current main master branch kind of thing. So I can get some kind of PR set up just to show that diff and then send it off to reviewers tomorrow-ish. I don't know.
And then I think we just got to keep track of how many comments are on there so that we don't create a GitHub crashy number of comments.
That was awful. For anyone who may not have been around the last time we went through this exercise, I think we ended up with 500 plus. It was enough comments that GitHub interface was just awful. So yeah, hopefully we won't run into that many this time. We're basically sending the same API back and saying, hey, can this go to beta now? So
yeah,
hopefully it'll be more straightforward. But
I did have a couple of friends who work at GitHub being like, why must you do this to us?
Yeah. Okay. Well, cool. If I don't hear anything else, I'll plan on getting something underway tomorrow, at least this week, just so we can get that process started. I recognize the people were asking for reviews. This is both a large API to review and very busy people were asking. So I don't expect this to be a really quick turnaround. I just want to get that process started.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And we want to allow as many weeks as possible so that there is a fair chance that we can get the beta graduation done before KubeCon EU time.
Yes. Conference driven development. That is the way to go. Okay. All right. Well, I think that is everything we had on the agenda, and we actually have plenty of time for PR and issue triage. Before I get there, is there anything else that I've missed on this agenda or something we should cover?
Lewin asks, will a ready condition be part of the beta release? Yes, I would imagine so.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, I can't say I think that it will definitely be in before we move everything to beta.
Let me start with pull requests because there's a good chunk of pull requests out there already that we have not covered recently enough. Meha, are you on I think this is not a good time zone for her.
Yeah.
But she has been doing
the internship with us,
Oh.
doing the documentation review. So she's looking for things to work on. So
yeah, it's awesome. She has been working away on one of our milestone issues. This is really the last thing we need to do before our V1 Beta 1 release. But I looked at this briefly and it seems like it's on the right track. This is not something that we can merge in the next week or two, but it is good to see one more thing getting taken care of and off the milestone. And so, yeah, thank you to her for taking that one on. The other one from Mark, I have not. Mark, you're actually on this call. No, he's not. But this also looked like a really straightforward one. I just need to spend some time reviewing it, or anyone can. It's just an environment that I don't personally run in, but again, seems reasonable. One of the things I really wanted to get to is some of our gaps. And I think these two, there's the name field gap, which I think we can delay a little bit until we get the route delegation gap going, because I feel like those are very closely tied. I'm pretty sure route delegation includes name field. Is that correct?
Yeah,
or
it does.
Okay.
It's already in the draft. So, I mean, I don't know if we want to just not do the small gap and just do it all as part of the route inclusion gap, or what?
I think there's just enough behavior to specify in how the name works and what we do. I haven't looked at it for a while, but I think I think the things that I would like to see in there are just some more description of like, how should you use it? What happens if it's not present? What happens if it's not present? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I saw those comments. I was thinking about, since I already got some of that, just add more to it in the inclusion gap.
Yeah,
But I'm okay either way.
I'm fine either way. I don't feel that strongly here. I think I lean towards this. This is one that can be split out. It can be a prereq. The gap already exists, and I think it's a new contributor for us. So I think it's fine to let this gap go in. The reason we'd been blocking like this gap had been sitting for, is it over a month now at least? And the whole reason we've been blocking is, well, we need that follow-up. We need that concrete use case, because this on its own isn't good. Like this, we need a reason for this to exist. And I think your gap going in, these are very closely tied together, but I'm fine with keeping them separate. And as long as we have broad consensus on both gaps, I'm fine with them being reviewed separately, because like like Nick mentioned, I think there is some nuance here and just how we handle, like even beyond route delegation, what does an empty name mean? How is it interpreted? How is it? I think there's the policy attachment angle of this too. I think there's maybe enough difference that keeping both GEPs is good, but I can be convinced either way.
But only concern I have, and maybe completely not an issue, but since the route inclusion GEP requires name, that we couldn't complete the implementation of that GEP until we did this one. So that's the only concern I have at all about them being separate.
I think in my mind, that's actually that friction is actually a net positive, because we need to ensure that this is properly designed and well implemented, and we don't sort of, because I'm really worried about having an optional field that can mean things in some cases, but is not always present. And that's why I really want us to have a really good set of rules that set out what happens when it's not present. Can you refer to things? If you're using this for things, like what happens if it's not present? How can you refer to rules in the absence of this name field? Because I think that practically a lot of people who are doing anything more advanced than very basic things are going to want to put the name in there. And that's why I originally proposed it be required. But and so that I really want us to have a really good set of this. And I think that having to do that before we can move on to implementing the thing is good, because it means that by the time we get to the inclusion, then this set of rules will be well written out, properly spec'd, and then we won't have to worry about doing that as part of the inclusion, like actual work to implement in terms of the API spec. There's a lot of work to do in that. I don't want to make it bigger.
Yeah, that's fair. Maybe what we should do then is, it sounds like we have consensus that we want to move forward with route delegation. And as part of that, we want to add a name field to HTTP route. So maybe we should unblock this GEP and do another round of review on it, get some feedback going, update the author of this GEP that yes, this is something we want to go forward with. If it ends up getting stuck a week or two from now and just not moving, then maybe at that point we consider, if this is really blocking the other GEP, then we can try and pull it back in to that GEP. But I'm fine with starting this way as them split. Cool. Okay, and the other GEP in here is gRPC route to Richard. I see you here. I think you're waiting for another round of review or feedback, or I've lost track of this one, sorry.
So I did see today that Boy and Nick added a final round of like small comments, and they gave textual LGTM. So if you look up at like all of the reviews, there are like 7 comment boxes and no check marks. I'm not exactly sure what the approval process is. Also, there was one person, like the very first reviewer, came back and never did a second round of reviews. So I'm not super clear on what needs to be done to, get this over the curb.
That's a good question. I think it seems like if unfortunately GitHub does not have like LGTM but fix these things. So that's why you see a lot of people write LGTM without actually doing LGTM, because if you did the actual thing, it just accidentally merges by itself.
Right. That makes sense.
At least when I was looking at it, it seems like it's basically, except for like the specific comments, like in pretty good shape. So I would just recommend fixing those, sending it out, and then people can just officially LGTM and get it in. I don't know if anyone else had some more like larger issue, because it's just a proposal. We still have to do API review.
Sorry, go on.
I think this is kind of like this weird practice that isn't obvious, that we've kind of evolved in Kubernetes community of like getting around that there's no way to approve plus comment this thing. So one of the things that we look for in proposals especially is trying to get multiple approvers. And so writing LGTM not just accomplishes the LGTM plus these comments, but someone else can feel free to merge this. Like any one of us can approve and LGTM this, but we want to see that other maintainers are okay with it. And so that's just kind of Nick and I think Bowie saying, yes, this looks good. Someone else is free to merge this when it looks good to them. That's my interpretation of this, but it is kind of a strange and unwritten practice.
Do all of the people who have commented need to like give a green check mark, or is like, okay, so just one is what I thought I heard?
Yeah, so usually what we try and do is for GEPs, we try and have at least 3 maintainers LGTM or approve or say, yeah, this is okay. You can find the list of maintainers in our owners file, but just offhand, Nick, Bowie, Harry, and James, I think are the current list of maintainers along with myself. And so 3 is just kind of a majority. That's the idea. I don't, none of this is written down. It's just kind of what has happened. We should be better about organizing and describing what has happened.
So what I would propose is, as soon as we finish talking about this, I will go and put a hold on the PR. I will, and then I'll ping Harry and John Howard are the ones who have the some outstanding comments. So I'll ping them on here. I think we give them, we lazy consensus this to like, I don't know, a few days maybe before next week's meeting. And then, so if Richard, if you fix up the comments that Bowie and I have left, and then no one else has any more comments by next week's meeting, I'd say we'll call that done then, and we'll remove the hold. Once my comments are fixed up, I will /LGTM, that will put the label on, but because the hold is present, it won't actually merge. And then Bowie is free to do his LGTM once his comments are resolved, and then we basically just need Rob or Harry or James to LGTM from them, and then we're 100% good.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
Hold. Yeah. Sound good?
Works for me. Thank you. Huge thanks to Richard. This has been a long-standing effort. It looks like this goes back to almost 2 months now. So thank you for bearing with our review process here. But this is an awesome get, and I'm excited to get this one in.
Me too.
All right, are there any other PRs of note that we should make sure we go through here? I think most of these are, I know all my PRs are waiting for myself to get back to reviews and comments on. Any other things that we should cover in PRs, or just head to issues? All right, issues it is. There's this first issue really interested me, and I think there is likely something unexpected with our documentation. This is a feature I added. It's adding path to request redirect. It's experimental. It's in 050 or intended for 050, but somehow, somewhere, maybe it's in our API spec, but some way we gave the illusion that this could be done, and it can't be done. At least not until we release experimental 050. And so I will take it on myself to follow up and figure out where our documentation has failed us here. My guess is it's our API spec. And yeah, this is quite the issue title. But either way, it's unfortunate. This is going to be a confusing part of our API. The idea that we have some fields that are experimental and we don't label them as clearly as we should, especially in the spec. So yeah, this will take more effort. I think what's actually happening here is expected. It's just not documented at all. So I can take this one on. The next one I wanted to get to, this one also is straightforward. I think we can redirect them to other. I think we have tracking issues for almost all of these. Shane had something for load balancing strategy before. Sticky session. I think all of these have other tracking issues, and we just need to redirect to
We might
those.
just need to check that they haven't been auto closed.
Yeah, that's true. Good point.
And make sure we freeze them if
Yeah.
they have.
Yeah. And then the last one, John, I don't think John is on this call, but this one is going to be a larger discussion, I think. I'm curious of implementers out there or users who are interested in this kind of feature. What are the common use cases for forwarding traffic to an external service, an external backend? Anyone familiar with? Is this a common feature request? Is this something that we feel like we should be supporting in the core API?
Something that we run into, because we can, for console, we can have services that are outside of Kubernetes. It's part of the same service mesh, and so those services aren't known within Kubernetes. So we had to come up with a keyword that we use to tell us that it's a service outside of Kubernetes. So somewhat similar.
I believe we're still using backend ref for that though. It's just backend ref of a different type of it's like console mesh service or something like that.
Yeah, mesh. I think it's just mesh. Yep.
Yeah, external name. If I'm familiar with how Istio is using this, it's to point to something like a domain name, which would be like is a use case within console service mesh. It's how we use like terminating gateways to basically connect to outside of the mesh things, whether that be like an upstream API or like a legacy service that's not integrated into the mesh. Yeah, I would have to think more about if or how this could be applicable like at this point for us.
So I think I put a comment in there about my concerns around using service of type external name. And that is basically about, it's super easy to use it for bad things. Super easy to use it to do all sorts of bad stuff. I am looking forward to the day when Ian and Brad do a keynote at KubeCon about how they 100% busted open a cluster with using a service of type external name, because like it's not very hard. And I know in Contour we actually had a big issue with service of type external name because if you configure external names of localhost, then and you have an inline proxy, then that means that you are accessing the inline proxy's localhost, which means that if you are running the Envoy admin web interface, you can then create any user who has access to create services can create a service of type external name with a name of localhost that points you to the web interface and expose the web interface for your envoys out to the internet. So, like I said, it's really easy to use this to do really bad stuff. And so I think that, we should, my feeling is that we should say no, using service of type external name is not valid, that this is not allowed. And if you want to do something like that, you need to add your own type that has its own rules around what host names are okay.
Yeah, that's great points. And that is, I know Contour was not the only implementation that had a similar issue. So the issue that I referenced here is CVE that is related to this and actually came out of Gateway API discussions and work and research and trying to figure out how we could do different things cross boundaries, such as namespace, but also to external name. And wow, this is really scary. And so that we have to be very careful. You forward to any DNS name, you don't know what it resolves to. You don't, do you just, deny list a subset of IPs that are dangerous? And then the other thing is the whole confused deputy attack of how do I know that you have access to expose this endpoint that I, as the controller or control plane, have access to. So it's a scary thing. With that said, I had a separate conversation with John a little bit about this, and I know one of their use cases for this is egress, right? To be able to apply policy to traffic on its way out, and that feels remarkably less scary. So in that sense, you can say, well, I can see why we'd want a generic way to represent this in the API, or at the very least not to outlaw it entirely. But there are huge risks here, and we could probably write a whole page in our documentation around external name. I don't know. I agree with your ideas, Nick, of a separate resource or some implementation specific thing if you must do this for Ingress. I'm less sure about the other potential use cases. I think this is good to leave open for discussion. I don't have an answer right now. I know users are asking for it, and I know it's really dangerous, and maybe there's a safe way that we haven't found yet. So open to other thoughts on this one, but this is 1070. Very, very open to additional comments on it. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I think egress is a whole different thing, and the part of this problem is that you're reusing the same concepts for ingress and egress, which have slightly different use cases. And as I said, I think that if we say to people, if we encourage people to do something separate for egress, like have an egress service type or something like that has some validation that ensures that you can't put localhost in or something like that, then I mean, that doesn't 100% protect you, because all it takes is someone having a publicly accessible domain name that refers to 127.0.0.1, and you're back in the same pickle. But yeah, like as long as people are aware of the risks of doing this, and that you cut out the obvious stuff, then I think it's okay at an implementation specific level. But like I said, it just opens so much of a can of worms about allowing any domain name that it's pretty scary.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think at the very least, this was a reminder that we didn't document this at all in Ingress, and what ended up happening is I don't think so. To be clear, I was not involved in the original design of Ingress, and I don't know if anyone still around was, but it was something that I forget which came first, service type external name or Ingress. I don't know, but I don't think anyone planned on their interaction. And now we know better, and we should at the very least document, maybe in our security model or somewhere, that watch out for this. I don't know that we can flat out say this should not be done, but should be careful. Maybe we should say we should. I don't know.
I lean towards saying it should not be allowed, and that if you want to do something like it, then don't use service or type external name. Use a separate resource, and that's a way to make it more safe. That way, people who don't want to have anything to do with this don't have to have the possibility of using service or type external name. I think using the service object has far too much magic built into it already. This is a good example of a place where the magic is too much, and you're explicitly saying we don't allow this specific thing because of these reasons. If you want to do something like it, make your own object that solves some of these problems. I think is much safer.
Yeah, that seems fair. Cool. Okay.
Did you want to say something there?
Yeah, actually, I was gonna. We were talking that first issue, the top one there. Rob, you made the comment that we don't really document which things are experimental. Which is, good point. So how do we want to address that, though?
So I should add one thing. In our guides, in our proper docs that we manually write with Markdown, We have little, yeah, I don't know. It's pretty clear that this is an experimental feature. What is much less clear, unfortunately, is our generated docs.
Right.
Our generated docs have this little gateway experimental tag somewhere in the reference doc somewhere, if we're lucky. That's the last time I saw it, but I don't have any tests to verify that it still exists. I know that existed at one point. But that I can't expect anyone reasonably to look at that and say, oh, this is experimental, you know, like what does that, you know, they may just say, oh, why is this random tag here? I don't know how to fix that. I would like to. So ideas welcome.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we could update the generator so that it finds those tags and adds like a big, you know, neon red, this field is experimental tag thing in there in the documentation or something.
I was just going to ask if there's a way to do that.
Yeah, so I spent a bit of time looking around at different generators. When we started this project, the generator we're using was really the only one that I'm aware of that did API docs. There are a couple alternatives now. One is a fork of this generator that added a little bit more stability to it. I think our solution is probably going to involve some work and maybe a transition to a different docs generation for this. I would love if there were a simpler workaround, but I haven't found one yet. So
I should also note that you know, I'm pretty confident that one of the outcomes of the documentation review that Meha is doing is that with a strong recommendation that we move to Hugo and to a site versioning scheme like the overall Kubernetes website. If you look at the overall Kubernetes website, it has a little drop down at the top that lets you pick the version that you're using it, and then everything inside the site is that version. There's a path element and all that sort of stuff. Right now, we don't have any of that. You have to sort of go to the different bit and be like, am I looking at the V1 Alpha 2 docs or the V1 Alpha 1 docs? The problem is only getting worse. The more versions we have, the more stuff we have in beta, the more stuff we have in, you know, we're going to end up with like some bits in beta, some bits in alpha, which is even worse. Like, you know, there's a lot of restructuring we've got to do with the docs website. And I think that that we're going to have to deal with the experimental thing as part of that as well. And then of course there also is the other thing that there is an upstream cap pending that will when it goes in allow for CRDs to have feature gate fields, specific fields feature gated, which we will then be able to use pretty easily and will replace the existing experimental deployment. And so, yeah, exactly how we make that work, well, I don't know that either. But yeah, so there's a lot to do around doing that stuff. I feel like all that stuff is stuff that needs to be done before we can confidently push the GA button.
yeah, I agree. Cool. Well, we are at time. I think that's everything that has happened in the past week, though. So if there is nothing else, maybe that's it for today. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, anyone want to say anything before we finish up?
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, everyone, as always.
See you.
Thanks for the good
Yeah.
discussion.